A very good afternoon to you on this gorgeous, warm March day. Here today, at Bentley-Walls, with another vlog on depth of field. Or should I say, depth of field is the distance between the nearest and the farthest objects that are in acceptably sharp focus in an image. The depth of field can be calculated based on focal length, distance to subject, the acceptable circle of confusion size, and aperture. Or, if that doesn't make any sense to you, DOF equals 2u squared NC over f squared. Does that make any sense to you whatsoever? Okay, let's get straight into it because I want to demystify this and make it a lot simpler to understand. Let's get to it. It kind of puts you off before you've even started, I think. But yeah, okay, so maybe you've just invested in a nice new lens or a second-hand lens for that matter. And you take it out the box, undo all the wrapping, and stick it on your camera. So that is all well and good. But suddenly you're confronted with all these numbers and you think, oh my God, what the hell have I done? These numbers are not just sort of pretty numbers designed to kind of make a lens look a bit prettier or a bit more interesting. They actually do something. And if you're starting out, I would always suggest having a go at getting your head around them. Now, if you just look at them all like that, it's just daunting and confusing. But actually, it's a very simple way of going about understanding what these numbers do. Now, just to start off straight away, on this particular lens, this is a Leica 35 Summicron, we have an aperture ring, f2, f2.8 for these are in half-stop increments. So they stop in between the numbers. Some lenses don't do that, but on this particular lens, that's what we have. Okay, pretty damn simple. And if you want to kind of understand it a little bit better, we have f16. Yeah, because there's the little white dot. And by the way, everything that we're going to do on this lens is about this line here, this dot that feeds through to this to this line. All right, so bear that in mind, keep that in mind. That's how we read various information on a lens. So, f-stops, easy peasy, you just click them down, and what they do, this is on f2 at the moment, what we have is, hopefully, without that reflection, it just is an iris. It operates exactly like an eye, and it closes down and makes that hole, hole open, hole closed, makes that hole smaller or larger. And all that's doing is regulating light. So typically on a really hot, blisteringly hot, midday, sunny day, your camera is probably going to be telling you, or your light meter is going to be telling you to make that hole smaller because we need to regulate that light. There's tons of it about, and we need to kind of not let all of it onto the film plane or onto the sensor because it's going to overexpose. So it's just a way of keeping light out. If you're indoors and it's nighttime and you've not got much light there, guess what? We're going to be opening up because we need as much light almost onto that sensor as possible because there's very little of it about. Generally speaking, that's generally what happens. Okay, if you've got an automatic camera, autofocus, auto everything, then that's what your camera is going to be thinking or deciding for you without you even knowing it. That's what's going to be happening. Okay, so those are f-stops. On some lenses, f-stops are on a ring further down here. On this particular lens, it makes no difference. On this particular lens, the ring is forward of the lens. Okay, so typically, what have we got? 5.6 there. So if you can just see for a moment, that is kind of the halfway house. Yeah? So you've got f2 over here, f16 here. 5.6 is pretty much middle for diddle. Now, on most lenses, that is the middle number. We've got 3 f-stops either side. The middle number, generally speaking, is the sweet spot, which will give you an optically best image. Best image in terms of sharpness, in terms of not having vignetting, so darkened corners and that kind of thing. However, on a decent lens, you're pretty much good either way. But there is always a sweet spot. Excuse me. But generally speaking, it's not something to lose sleep over. If it's a really poor quality lens and you're opening up and you're going to get loads of vignetting, then, unless you like vignetting, then maybe it's a bit of an issue. But on a decent lens such as this, it's not really something to have kittens over. It's just information, knowledge. Even on a good quality lens, the sweet spot is 5.6 f8, something like that. It's probably 5.6 on this lens because it's bang in the middle. So just something to bear in mind, but not, we're not talking about perfections or imperfections of a lens here. We're talking about depth of field. Okay, but I'm just going to take you through these numbers and what they are, just to sort of so you understand a few basic things. So on this lens, we have a tab, which Leica often put on their lenses, not all of them, but we have a tab, and that's our focus ring. And we can see that that's what's turning. There's orange and white numbers, and basically, if we turn it right through there, we're getting feet and meters. So orange is feet, white is meters. For this, I'm going to just refer to meters. Okay, because it's just probably simpler, and probably most of the world is in meters. But you can read off. So if I'm talking about something at 15 meters, 15 meters, 1.5 meters, that's typically 5 feet. You can see the corresponding feet equivalent. So that's that. Hey, we're 2/3 down the lens here, and we've already gotten to grips with what's what. We've demystified all of those numbers in one easy swoop. Okay, here we're at 0.7 meters, and if we spin it all the way around, we have a little symbol here. It's like a number 8 lying down, fallen over, whatever, and that's our infinity. That's our infinity symbol, and that's the same on pretty much every lens. Okay, infinity. That means that everything is in focus to infinity, or we're focused on infinity. So we go 3 meters, 5 meters, 10 meters, and then it suddenly goes to infinity. That's just the physics on this lens. Okay, so that's 2/3. 2/3 of those numbers we've just completely got our heads around very, very quickly. And that's kind of what I want to show you. It's not difficult, all right? This is a 35mm lens, which you can see here on this particular lens in orange, 35, just so we know what we're dealing with. 35mm lens is typically a wider lens. You've got a 50mm lens on a 35mm camera. On SLR or rangefinder, this is a rangefinder. It's full frame. So that's a little something to bear in mind, because Anyway, I'm not going to get into that. I'm not going to confuse things. Just it's a 35mm camera. This is a rangefinder. We're 2/3 of the way down, and then we'll notice these white numbers and lines. This is our depth of field scale. So now we're down to the nitty-gritty. Depth of field scale. What in the hell is that, I hear you ask? Maybe you're familiar with it. That's fine as well. But this scale here is going to tell us, give us some information, and if you're starting out, I highly, highly recommend if you've got chance, just have a little glance through and familiarize yourself with this. Again, we're dealing with this with this line. We've got a center line here, yeah, that runs on the very top of the lens. It's imaginary, but we have got a bit of a line there, and we've got a dot. But that's what we're going to do. We're going to be correlating this number with this number with this number, and then vice versa. We're going to be reading off. So typically, the depth of field scale is going to tell you what. So let's say you're photographing your friend, and your friend, you've got focus, and you look down here, and you are, well, let's just say you're 3 meters away. You're exactly 3 meters away, just by chance. You're 3 meters away, because there's the 3 and there's the line, and that's the scale. That's, feet is the giveaway. That's what tells you the distance. Okay, you've just focused on your friend, and your friend is 3 meters away, or let's say 10 feet away, because that's what's in between those two orange numbers. 10 feet away, and you're at 5.6 aperture, which is halfway open, as we've already discussed. That is halfway open. 5.6, 3 meters away. Okay, this is a kind of a small lens, so it's a little bit tricky to see exactly, but we can still do it. Okay, 3 meters, 5.6. And what we're doing here is taking this number, 5.6, and looking for it on this scale. Now you notice in that halfway line, you've got 2.8, 5.6, 8, 11, 16, and exactly symmetrical on the other side. Okay, easy peasy, not a problem. We're taking the number 5.6 because that's where our f-stop is at. Okay, halfway open, that hole is halfway open, and we're going, where's 5.6? Here's 5.6, and then you'll notice the line, the corresponding line that takes it through and then takes us to this number here. Okay, we're focused at this at 3 meters, but what we've got on 5.6 is approximately 2 meters, maybe just a little bit more than 2 meters. Hopefully you're seeing that. Hopefully the reflection isn't, yeah. So we've got 2 meters. So we're focused at 3 meters. So we can say straight away, okay, what is going to be in focus in front of our model, our subject matter, the person we're photographing, is going to be 2 meters. So 2 meters to 3 meters is 1 meter. So everything in front of our model at 1 meter will be in focus. After that, or less than that, is going to be out of focus. If there's anything in the foreground that is less than 2 meters, so something at 1.5 meters or 1.2 meters, that's all going to be out of focus. But at 2 meters, even though we're focused at 3 meters, up to 2 meters is going to be in focus, and our model is going to be in focus. But what's going to be in focus behind our model? Beyond our model, the person we're photographing. Again, what we do, we're at 5.6. We're going to look for 5.6 down here. Ah, there we go. And there's the corresponding line, which takes us to 5 meters. So 3 to 5, this difference of 2 meters. So we know that 2 meters beyond anything behind our model at 2 meters, up to 2 meters, is also going to be in focus. So that, in effect, we're focused at 3 meters. That, in effect, is our zone of focus. That is what is going to be in focus. Everything else beyond there, 10 meters is going to be out of focus, or 6 meters even is going to be out of focus. 5.5 meters is going to be out of focus. But between that distance, 2 and 5 meters, when we're focused at 3 meters, all of that will be in focus. Now, that's just an example. If we go, well, we're going to shoot at f8 because we want to increase our depth of field. We want to get more in focus in front of the model and beyond the model. Actually, let's go to f16. Right the way shut. And we've got plenty of light, so we can do that. We can, our meter settings will allow us f16 because there's tons and tons of really bright sunlight. It's a really sunny day. There's loads of light kicking about. So, but let's stay at 3 meters. But now we're at f16, and we want as much, because we want as much in focus in front of the model and beyond the model. So typically, we're still focused at 3 meters, but now we're looking for f16 to see what's focused in front of the model. And there's f16 right at that edge. Sorry, knocking the camera. And we're right between 1.2 and 1.5 meters. So let's call it 1.3.5 meters, something like that. Let's call it 1.3 meters. 1.3 meters is between 1.3 meters and 3 meters. That's increased it because before it was at 2. So we've got another, just over half a meter. Now, what is beyond it, what's in focus beyond our model at 3 meters, f16 on the other side, there's the corresponding line. Hey, guess what? We're at infinity. So everything in the background, absolutely everything in the background beyond our model, the person we're photographing, is going to be in focus. So now our zone has just increased massively. We've got over 1.5 meters in front of our model, and everything behind our model at 3 meters is going to be sharp, in focus. F16 will increase this. F2, wide open, will decrease it. So if we do exactly the same thing here, still focused at 3 meters, F2, got a big wide hole now. Now, F2 is going to be, we're going to look for F2. Well, we don't actually have F2 on this scale. We have 2.8. So corresponding line, that's kind of half a meter. So we've got actually less than half a meter to play with. Probably something more like 40 centimeters in front of our model at 3 meters. And then again, F2, but we've only got 2.8 here on the scale. I tell you what, let's just put it at 2.8 just to make it simple. So 2.8 is going to give us, there's the corresponding line between 3 meters and 5 meters. So typically 4 meters. So we've got 1 meter behind our model that's going to be in focus. 2.8. Well, we've got about half a meter. That's going to be our zone of focus. So typically between 2.5 meters and 4 meters. Now this is a 35mm lens. If I were to put a 50mm lens on there, or a longer lens still, a 75mm lens, these tolerances are going to be even less. Even less, they're even smaller, even less in focus. And that's just physics. That's just down to, and it doesn't matter whether it's a Sony lens or a Nikon lens or any lens you like, any manufacturer of lens, the wider you go, so this is a 35mm lens, 35. If I went to 28, 24, 21 and wider, the wider I go, the more tolerance I have, the more that will be in focus, in front of the model and behind the model. That's just how it is. Get used to that. Yeah? Get used to that. That's just how it is. That's, regardless of manufacturer, that's physics. Okay? Longer lenses will have far less tolerance, and it will go even more out of focus than you know, it'll just look completely, you won't, you know, on a long lens you'll hardly understand or see or recognize what those shapes are because it's gone so out of focus. That's just, you know, that's just how it is. It doesn't just go out of focus quicker and have less tolerance, it goes even more out of focus, if that makes sense. On a wide lens, the out of focus, you'll see everything, but it's just slightly out of focus. Not, you know, but you'll recognize everything beyond the model. So that's kind of it. Now, if you're starting out, as I say, it's just really a really good idea to have one lens. I would always recommend a 50 because a 50 gives you a really good understanding of what depth of field is. So if you've got something, let's say you're at f2.8 or f2, you're around about here, you've got a lot less tolerance, more goes out of focus. So it teaches you very quickly, very visually, what is going to be out of focus and what isn't. On a wider lens, not so much goes out of focus. It's some people say, well, that's a lot more tolerant. Personally, I don't. I say you've got a lot less choice because if you want to get something out of focus, it's much more difficult to do with a wide-angle lens. That's just me. You know, that's how my mind works. But if you're starting out, it teaches you more visually how that works. It teaches you that yes, if I'm open up like that, that's called opening up, closing down. You know, f16 most things will be in focus. If I'm on a 50mm lens and I'm opening up round about here, f4, f2.8, you will see visually the loss of focus. Less so on a 35 and even more on a 28 and a 24 and a 21. That's just how it is. So with that, let's talk a little bit about why it's useful, when it's useful. So you still with me? So that's all kind of, hey, the physics of it. Numbers, squiggles, they're not just there to decorate a lens. When do we use them? Why is it kind of useful to know? I mean, surely you can just use a light meter and, you know, see what the lighting levels are, and hey, maybe you've got a light meter in your camera and just go by what the light meter in your camera says. That's, you know, that nothing wrong with that. But why is it good to know what your lens does in any given situation? Well, as I say, sometimes you want to intervene. Sometimes you want to be able to override that automated chip that you have in your camera and have some input yourself. I mean, you know, some people love auto lenses, autofocus, auto cameras, and there's absolutely nothing wrong with that whatsoever. Bring it on, fill your boots. However, if you find yourself thinking, I saw that image and I thought the background would be out of focus, and it's not because the camera wanted to sort of optimize light to give you optimum depth of field, then you've gone that next stage, and then that's when a manual lens comes in, and you can sort of intervene and sort of craft the image to the way you want it to look. Give it a little bit more depth of field. Maybe slow the shutter speed down a little bit because you want to introduce a little bit of movement because you think that aesthetic would really lend itself to the image. So that's kind of what it's about. That's why it's good to know what we're going to have in focus, what our depth of field is going to be. And as I say, if you have this one lens, this 50mm lens, if you're starting out, then you're going to learn the characteristics of that lens very, very quickly. If you start mix and matching and putting wide-angle lenses on, they operate different. You can if you have the exact same scene, the exact same distance that you're photographing, the same subject matter, same lighting, everything. Two exact same cameras, one with a 50, one with a 35, set at exactly the same f-stop. You'll see far more in focus on the wider lens than you will the standard lens, and that's just the nature or the characteristic of those two lenses. Again, doesn't matter about manufacture; it's just about physics. And so, certain photographers kind of... there are photographers in London, street photographers in London, for example, that will typically, maybe on a very sunny day, set their camera to ISO 400, let's say, or they're shooting film at 400 ISO. They'll park their f-stop at f8 typically, and maybe shoot at about 12 foot, something like that, thereabouts, and then they're introducing something called zone focusing. And so a very manual setting camera suddenly becomes a point and shoot. Anybody that they want to photograph that falls within that zone, because they will know that with those settings, they will have pretty much everything in focus. They will, from 12 foot, in fact, if they focus at 12 foot, their zonal range of focus will be about 7 foot to infinity. So they'll know that everything is in focus, and all they have to do, frees them up. They don't have to get focused, they don't have to set their aperture or anything like that, and it frees them up to just compose the shot. And they'll know that as long as they don't touch the lens by accident, they can just lift the camera and boom, shoot the shot, which can seem very appealing. You've turned your camera into a point and shoot camera, an instant camera. Now that's zone focusing, and there's something called hyperfocal zone focusing, which I'll deal with in the next vlog, because it'll lead on very nicely from this depth of field vlog. But I think it's too sort of complicated to get into. I don't want to sort of merge those two things, because it'll just, it'll maybe blow your mind a little bit. But it's just in terms of what you can do. This is about understanding a lens to know what it does in what situation. But so the physics of the lens, but then how that relates to your work, and how that relates to how you like to shoot. No right or wrongs here. No right or wrongs. It's just everybody has a slightly different understanding of the world, or not understanding of the world, that sounds a bit pretentious, but they see the world slightly differently. They want to achieve slightly different things in slightly different situations. No right or wrong, it's just down to aesthetic, really, and what feels right to them. Some people, as I say, some people use wide-angle lenses, some people use standard lenses. For street photography, I'm talking about here. Maybe some people use long lenses. I don't know. Most likely they do, but that's not generally the case. But in terms of, I don't want to say developing your own style, because you can develop your own style in different ways. You can use certain types of film, very grainy film, and then process it a certain way, and then sort of make it very contrasty. You can get your own style in various different ways. However, what I think it's really important to do is, how can I best explain this? So, if you look at a famous photographer's book, let's say 50 images, let's say Cartier-Bresson. Yeah, that's a good example. Cartier-Bresson, look through a book of his, and you'll see that most of the time, most of his images, everything is fairly sharp or in focus. I won't say sharp so much because back then lenses were slightly, they were just different. Not as sharp as or clinical as lenses today. But most things are in focus most of the time. Not always, but they're not sort of dramatically short depth of field and things are way out. And they're full frame, so you get a really good understanding of what's what. And so typically, he didn't shoot with a digital camera. Digital cameras weren't around then. I know for a fact that most of the time he shot 400 Kodak Tri-X, I think. Anyway, it doesn't matter about the make, but 400 film. So therefore, we can, that was a reasonably fast film back then. It seems quite slow today, but back then, it was one of the fastest films. But so we know that 400 ISO was what he was using most of the time, unless he was pushing it a little bit. Maybe he did. Maybe he did at times. But we can say, because most things are in focus, he was probably shooting at around about f11, maybe f16 most of the time. Sometimes, perhaps occasionally f8, depending on the scene. If he was some distance from the subject. But he kind of wanted most things in focus. So we can say that about. So that's what was comfortable to him. That's the way he kind of went about his business. That's how he shot most of the time. I think it's fairly, you can say that with a reasonable amount of confidence. Now, that's great. I do that as well most of the time. But occasionally, I want to throw some stuff out. Sometimes I want that. Now, Cartier-Bresson could have thrown stuff out as well because he used a 50mm lens. I can throw stuff out as well because I use a 50mm lens. I think most of the time Cartier-Bresson didn't. Regardless, what you start to recognise once you begin to understand these squiggly numbers on a lens is that you can do all sorts of things. Now, you may not want to do all sorts of things. You may want to just shoot most of the time at f11, f16 and get most things in focus most of the time. That's fine. Nothing wrong with that. I would say there's an awful lot right with that. For the vast majority of the time. Great. You don't need to know the rest of the stuff. However, in order to not know the rest of the stuff, you need to know it. You need to sort of know what it does in a given situation, in given light. If we go a little bit closer to something, our depth of field starts to get shallower and shallower. If we pull back a little bit, we shoot at 12 feet rather than 6 feet, far more starts to be in focus, or we get more tolerance in our depth of field. And so, this is really good to know. This is really good to know so that you can then shoot in the way that feels good to you, that feels comfortable to you. I'm not necessarily talking about, just parking your f-stop at f11, never moving it from that, always shoot. I mean, you can do that. There's nothing wrong with doing that. But you with confidence and intelligence, you can understand what that lens will do in what lighting. And then you can make the decisions. Maybe a lot of Leica shooters say, I always shoot open, at f2 or f point, that's what the lenses are made for. Okay, that's great. Yeah, if that's what you want to do, that's great, nothing wrong with that. You're going to be shooting with a very shallow depth of field all the time. If that's what you want to do, that's great, But I would argue that's not what they're made for. They're made for a lot more things than just doing that. You can do that, and you can throw that background out of focus very easily doing that. That's great. But, I would argue that it enables you just to shoot in low light a lot of the time. You have an extra 1 or 2 stops that allows you to shoot in low light. That's one of the great advantages to a faster lens. So, but it doesn't mean you have to do that all the time. That's what they're made for. No, they're not made for that. They're made to be very effective lenses and capable lenses with great optics. Now, what I'm saying is, if you get your head round the depth of field thing, you can then start applying that to your style of photography, the way you like to photograph something. You know that if you go close up and you open up, you're going to get a short depth of field, and that's kind of what you want to do, because maybe the background is ugly, or you just want to draw attention to the subject matter, make it more emphasized. Maybe you don't. Maybe you want, maybe the background's really interesting, so you're gonna go, you're gonna stop right down to f16 and get maximum depth of field, the most amount in focus. You will get a very good knowledge of that lens. Use the 150 if you're starting out, and you'll get so good at that in much quicker time than if you start mix and matching and swapping, and because they have different characteristics. I promise you. Better to learn one, get very good at that, and then move off to something else if you want to, or don't. Stay with the 50. If that's what you want to do, but get good at one first. I think that's really, really key. It will teach you an awful lot, and then you can move with confidence and go, okay, I'm shooting wider now. I see what he was saying. You get far more in focus most of the time. And that's either a good thing or not a good thing. That's really helpful or not helpful. If it's not helpful if you want to throw focus, if you want depth of field, if you want stuff to go out of focus in the background sometimes. Do you see what I mean? It's either an advantage. It's much easier to do that with a 50mm lens than with a wider lens, and you'll get to understand that, and you'll get to understand how much one lens goes out of focus compared to another. If you go up the scale to maybe a longer lens, like a 75mm or a 90mm lens, for example, you'll see that the depth of field and tolerances are, it's much, much shorter, and it goes much more out of focus, almost to the point where you start to not really recognize what the shapes are or what the background is that's gone out of focus. And you'll begin to, things will start to fall into place, and you'll be able to then work out, as I say, what works for you, what works with your style of work, what works with how you want to show stuff, you know, how you want to, what your aesthetic is, what your aesthetic is. It's a really, really lovely thing when you couple a lens to your way of working, and it's not just you know, some famous photographer zone focus with a 35mm lens. I read that somewhere. I'm going to copy that, but I'm not going to know anything else about anything else because that's all I've done. I've just copied somebody. You can do that. There's nothing wrong with that, except that you stay in a very limited understanding of what a lens can do. I guess that's probably enough at rabbiting. I think, yeah. Let's leave it there. I'll talk about zone focusing in the next vlog, and we'll discuss that and see what's what with that. It's a really kind of useful thing to know. That said, I've never once used it, so not necessarily useful to me, but a lot of other people find it really useful, and I can see why. I can totally and utterly see why. But I know that I know shooting with a 50mm lens and the way I like to do things, it actually doesn't. I get a lot more keepers doing it the way I do. But that's just me. Other people shoot the way they shoot and will get a lot more keepers using zone focusing. It's a brilliant thing to note, whether you use it or not. I would argue. Far better to know than not to know. So yeah, I'll leave it there. Thanks very much for stopping by, and see you for the next one. Cheers for now.